Hey, book friends, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to my quarter 1 update as well as reading wrap up. There's going to be so many things in this video and it's so much fun. It just kind of goes through how my reading has gone. And honestly, this chunk of 3 months, January, February, March, I have not read that many books, but I have read some amazing books. And I cannot wait to share it all with you. So stay tuned if you're interested in learning a bit about how it's been going, as well as what my favorites have been over these past 3 months. So hi, my name is Angie. Welcome to the channel if you're new here, or welcome back if you've been coming for a while. So like I said, it is my quarter 1 wrap up / update video. I'm going to be sharing some statistics with you really for the first time because I don't usually track them. But this year my sister recommended this awesome planner. So it's called Always Fully Booked. And it's also kind of where I plan everything, my day, my life, all the things. So it's really great, but yet it has spreads that have to do with your TBR as well as your wrap up, as well as like a book review and all these things. And I've been tracking a few more things, which has been really fun. So anyway, onward with some of the quick statistics, because I know some of you don't love statistics. But as for the first quarter, how much have I been reading? So the first thing I have up here is a graph of how many pages I read. So you can see I read the most in January and the least last month in March. But March included some of my favorite books. So I'm okay with that. And then you move on to kind of where I sourced the books, which I was really curious. I thought I was going to read more from my shelves. But what's great is it's a kind of a half and half split. Is I read about 6 books from my shelves, 6 books from the library, and then I listened to 1 book solely on audio, which I really don't usually do that. I usually kind of have it on audio and have it physically, and I'll just count it physically if I read both. But that's not bad. I use my library quite a bit, and I had that in my goals for 2022, especially when it came to like thriller books. I haven't bought too many books. Okay, I have a little bit, but they are used books, and I have a book called Coming, but I haven't bought books for TBRs or anything like that. I've mostly just read off my shelves or the library. So I'm proud of myself for that. And then the last stat I wanted to look at, which I was actually quite curious about, was what genre I've been reading, like what types of books. So you can see here that it was quite a bit of fantasy, but I've also been interested in like sci-fi. And then you can see down here, my historical fiction has not gone well. One amazing, one my DNF for the quarter. So because of my stats, I think I'll just go through the books based on genre. I will start with, let me start with sci-fi, I think, because like I said, I'm curious about sci-fi. Sci-fi also intimidates me. So I read 2 sci-fi books, and I read Lost in Time, and I also read Project Hail Mary. So I got both of these from the library because, again, I don't know if I like science fiction or not. So I got them from the library. I loved, especially this one, especially Project Hail Mary. I found it to be a really, really fun book. I feel like it is definitely a favorite, a standout book from this first quarter, mainly because of a few things. One of the best characters ever. And I don't want to say too much because I don't want to spoil it. And now I understand why people were a bit cagey when they were talking about Project Hail Mary when I was listening to reviews. It's because of this character, and this character is fantastic. And that's all I'm going to say. But I also found the science of this book to be approachable and interesting. Like, it was enough science to do a good job. Although, just being a scientist myself, like I have a PhD in science, some of the lab experiments I'm like, maybe not. But that's okay. I still enjoyed it. I still feel like they did a really good job of it. But really, one of the favorite things I found about this book was just that it was laugh out loud funny. Like, I think it's Andy Weir's writing style, because that was the thing I liked about The Martian. Now, granted, I didn't finish The Martian, but what I read of it, I found funny. And he just has a witty way of writing, especially when you're talking about a storyline such as Project Hail Mary, where this man is alone in space. Like, he wakes up alone on a shuttle and he has to figure out what's going on. He has to figure out why he's there, what happened to everybody else, things like that. And so it's kind of that singular perspective, which you feel like should be boring. Andy Weir has a way of really drawing that out and making it pretty funny. So I highly enjoyed Project Hail Mary. And then as for Lost in Time, I forget what the author's name is, but I have the book up here. I enjoyed this book. Now, it's not a standout favorite, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it for a number of reasons. So, it is a book about this man that becomes lost in time, and these other people have to kind of find him. It's a little bit complicated because it involves time and time bending and time machines and that aspect of science fiction, but it also has a bit of like a thriller side to the book. Like you're trying to figure out a mystery, especially on the kind of present day timeline. The people that were left behind, if you will, are trying to figure out a mystery as to how everything happened. And then the person who was sent back in time and sent back, as you can see from the cover, to like the time of the dinosaurs, which actually was probably the reason I didn't love this book as much as I thought I would. I wanted more dinosaurs. I wanted more of that timeline, a little less of the present day one, although I understand kind of why we had to camp out in the present day a little bit more to understand the story. But I feel like it was really enjoyable. I feel like it was more of a thriller sci-fi type book. It kind of reminded me a bit in tone to Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. Not at all in plot or anything that's going on, but more in tone of that like thriller science fiction kind of messing with time sort of idea in the book. And it was really good and it was well done. So I think I gave that 4 stars. I enjoyed it. Okay, so those were my sci-fi books. Now to move to, let's do historical fiction, because I know a lot of you like my historical fiction content. And I actually happen to own both of these books, so I can hold them up. So I read They Went Left by Monica Hesse and A Single Thread by Tracy Chevalier. Okay, I loved this book, 5 stars. I DNF'd this book. So let's go through that a bit. This book is a YA historical fiction World War II book. It was very good. It's told from the perspective of this girl. She's like 17 years old. She was in a concentration camp. So this story is told post-concentration camp, which I feel is a unique timeline. And I did enjoy that because it really got into kind of the damage that was done even after people were released from the most horrific time in their life that had to really still be healed. And so this book covered a lot of that. It covered this girl as she was looking for her brother. She believes the rest of her family died in the concentration camp, but she does not believe her brother did. When she last saw him, she promised she would find him. And that's what she is trying to do in this book. And it's heart-wrenching and beautiful. And it really does follow kind of that mental health, mental healing post-trauma. And it was done really well. And I felt like it was done in a YA realm. So it's definitely not middle grade, but it is gentler than some adult World War II books. So I loved it. So that's They Went Left. As for my other one, so this is a book I tried to read for my reading challenge. So I have a reading challenge. It's all linked down below. So we were reading this kind of together in Discord with a number of different people. I just either wasn't in the right month to read it. It's been a struggling health season for me, but I just wasn't hooked by it, really was what it came down to. It is about this woman. This is post World War II. And it's basically the idea is like a lot of men have died. So there are a lot of women who are kind of spinsters or left alone. And there just aren't enough men to be married off, basically. And then it comes to this woman who's just trying to make it. She's working as a typist and she's just making ends meet. And she just doesn't really have a lot of friends or a lot of community until she joins this sewing club where they're embroidering cushions for the cathedral. And she joins this group. And that part I loved. I loved the friendship. I loved the other women. I just honestly, after a while, I just got really bored with her journey of like finding herself and all this. If she would have just stayed with all her friends, I think I would have finished the book. But then even the fact that I was reading it with other people and I got hints of what was coming, I wasn't interested in that direction. And I won't say anything because I don't want to spoil it. I just wasn't interested in the book going that way. And so I just am practicing putting a book down if I know that I'm probably not going to like it. So I just DNF'd. I DNF'd it about, well, obviously that far into it. All right, so that was my historical fiction. Moving on to fantasy, which was my largest category. I feel like I read one middle grade, one YA, and the rest adult fantasy. And so it was an enjoyable mix. So the first two I read and I want to talk about are these two, which I really enjoyed. So this was a reread. This was my only reread for the first part of the year, but I want to reread more. But it's The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. It's a favorite. And then I also read The Mask of Mirrors by M.A. Carrick, which I've been talking a lot about. It's a very big book. I think it was the biggest one I read in this first quarter. But let me just chat a bit about this, because this was also the book we read together in Discord for January with my reading challenge. And it was really fun because there were a lot of people who hadn't read it before, and I got to experience it a bit through their eyes. But it is about a girl named Vasya who lives in like 16th century Russia. She lives with her family kind of further away from Moscow, kind of in the countryside, but her family's well off. And what it comes down to is that her mother died early on in her life, and she was left to be raised by her like nanny and her brothers and her father and things like that, until the dad decides to get remarried. Like, he has to get remarried because she's a little bit of a wild spirit, and the woman he marries is very traditional. Like, she is very anxious, and she actually feels like she sees like spirits and things like that, and she just wants to go to a convent. She doesn't want to get married, but she gets roped into this family and Vasya as her stepdaughter. And Vasya has some magical giftings that were passed on from her mother. And there's a lot of like Russian folklore in here, and that's my favorite part. And so this was just such a good book, and it was very fun to reread. And it was really funny because as I was reading it with other people, some people were like, wow, this is really dark and kind of creepy. And I'm like, you're right. I just didn't pay attention enough. Like, or that stuff didn't bug me because I was so engrossed in this story, and I can read past some of that. Some other things I can't read past, but like creepy and gory, a little bit more on the horror side than I remember. It was okay. I just was able to read past it because I just love the book so much. So that's the first fantasy book I reread. And the next one I read for the first time was this one. So this is The Mask of Mirrors by M.A. Carrick. So I enjoyed this book. Now, it wasn't like I love this book, I can't wait for the next book in the series. I want to continue with it because it ended in a way that really drew me back in. But I found the book a little bit, it's not boring. It wasn't boring. It was more that there were so many characters that I could not keep track of, and there was no good way to do it. Like, there was no glossary or like family chart or anything like that. And I love when fantasy books do that because it really, really helps me remember who everybody is. And so this has to do with this woman who is like playing a really big con. Like, she is impersonating a higher up in society, like a prestigious member of society. And then she joins society and has to keep wearing that mask and keep pretending. And there's a lot of things going on at that time, like politically, as well as within the family, that she's trying to convince that she is who she says she is. And that's really entertaining. Could have just been a little shorter, honestly, or just more extras to help me remember who everybody was, because I was just getting lost in the weeds is how it felt. But I still enjoyed it. I think I gave it 4 stars, maybe 3.5, but probably 4 stars. Okay, so those are 2 fantasy books I read. Oh, and then I also read Amari and the Great Game. I got this from my sister, so I'm just going to pop up a picture here. Oh, guys, I loved it. It's just very entertaining book. I love the friendships between Amari and her best friend, and I'm forgetting the name right now, the dragon friend. And I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed how the story was kind of taking it to another level of like what was going on in the world, as well as how she was growing and developing in her like giftings and powers and things like that. And it was good. It did give me like Nevermore vibes, way more than like Harry Potter, but Nevermore vibes. I'm like, this just seems very similar, but enough different that it was very enjoyable, and I'm excited for the next book to come out. So that's Amari and the Great Game. Oh, and then I also read these 2 books. So I'm just kind of doing them 2 at a time, so this video isn't so long. So I read Storm and Siege, as well as The Name of All Things. Oh my gosh, I love this. So I'm going to hold on to this. Hold on. This was good. It's the second book in the Grishaverse Shadow and Bone trilogy. I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying the character of Elena as she is dealing with some consequences from the first book and kind of growing in her character. I feel like it has a bit of like second book setup where they're looking and striving for some things, and some relationships are kind of apparently going south, and she's feeling more lonely. Kind of some classic second book tropes, in my opinion. So it's not my favorite, but I'm excited to see how the story concludes. And in general, this is about a girl named Elena, who in the first book was part of this like guard who is going into the Shadowfold, which was this area that was dark and full of monsters. And lo and behold, she has a power that protected everybody. And then but she didn't know she had that power. And then once it was revealed, she starts to get trained as a Grisha. And it goes from there in a lot of different ways. And then this book kind of picks back up on that, like I said, and we'll see where it ends. And so I enjoyed it. I think I just gave it maybe like 3 stars. It's hard to know if my annoyances with it had more to do with the fact that it's YA or not. Probably, to be honest, because you get to like a book like this, which I know some people just really didn't like. I really loved it. So this is called The Name of All Things by Jen Lyons. So this is the second book in the course of Dragon series, The Ruin of Kings being the first one, which I really enjoyed last year. It made it to my top books of the year list. And that book was set around the main character of Kieran as he was kind of going through life. So it was a book where it was telling the backstory, basically. Like you start at the very end and then they go through the whole book to explain how he got to that point. And it goes through kind of a couple different timelines to tell it. And I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed the backstory of this main character of Kieran and how he kind of resulted in this catastrophe in the capital and all of these things by the end. I loved it. I loved all the character development. I just really loved the characters in that first book. So this book continues with some of the same characters. What is unique about this book and why I liked it is it kind of takes the same story and it tells it again. And I know that sounds kind of terrible, but it tells it from a different character's perspective. Like this main character of, her name's Janelle. And it goes back through her backstory. And it interweaves within what you know of Kieran's story and what happened in that timeline of Kieran. Like it'll kind of tag it to what was happening in that first book while it's telling this second book. And it matters. And I love stories like that. So it's kind of confusing in timeline ways, but I really enjoy that. So it reminds me a bit, not at all in plot again, it reminds me a bit of like The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton, because it's so confusing. Actually, that book was more confusing, but it's so confusing as to what is being told and what we don't know. Like, and so you're getting information and you're filling in gaps, but you also realize you probably don't know the full story even yet. It's a very slow unfold of a plot line that's going to lead to a bigger bad thing, which you're pretty aware of as you're going through at least the second book, kind of what they're aiming for, like what they're going to fight in the end, if you will, like what's the like climax of the plot. But there's a lot of setup, but it's a very interesting story. It's not just like so-and-so's character, here's how she is. It's like, wow, here's what's happening. Here's all the players that we already know. Here's how they're interacting with her story. I don't want to say too much more, and I know that sounds a little confusing, and I know some people really don't like that. I'm all for it. I'm so excited to get to the third book. So I love the characters. I love the way the story's being told. It's awesome epic fantasy for me. So I'm loving that book. That was 5 stars. I just finished that like last week. So I'm still very excited about it. All right, as for the thrillers I've read, so I've read 3 of them this past quarter. I got them all from the library, so I'm proud of myself for that because I said I wasn't going to buy thrillers anymore. Although I probably could have bought at least the Finlay Donovan one because that's a really fun book. So I'll just put them all up. I read 9 Lives by Peter Swanson. I wanted to kind of feel a Peter Swanson. I read The Naturals by Jennifer Lynn Barnes because I love inheritance games. And then I read Finlay Donovan by, I forgot her name, L something. I'll put it up so you can see. I mean, they were all exactly what I needed. Thrillers are the books I go to when I just need a break and just entertainment. And this is qualified. So for the first one, 9 Lives by Peter Swanson, this book, it was just really fun in the sense of it was a bit of like an Agatha Christie and then there were none retelling, which I know that drives some people nuts, but I love them. But it's centered around this idea that 9 people got the same letter in the mail and it was a list of names and their name was on it. And eventually they all start dying one by one. So you're trying to figure out who's doing it, who's responsible, who all these people are. And at first it feels a little hard to keep track of them all, but there's always kind of the list of names and it helps out. Like I felt like I could handle who everybody was. What I was loving is I was loving the suspense feeling I got from it. I'm like, I felt suspenseful for every single character because I'm like, how are you going to die? I found it so interesting. So I really enjoyed that Peter Swanson book. I'm not sure if I'm going to go on to more or not, but I liked it. It was fun. As well as, what else did I read? Oh, The Naturals. Okay. So this is maybe not as much a favorite. Oh, it's definitely less of a favorite than the Inheritance Games, but I could feel her same writing style. I feel like this is more of her debut book. I'm not sure if it truly is, but it came out before Inheritance Games. And it is about this group of kids who are gifted in kind of different things that help out police detectives, basically. And so they're part of this elite group. It's kind of a secret group that helps solve crimes. But our main character has a challenging past, especially with her mom, who we find out early on was murdered. And then our main character has had to deal with that, as well as the fact that then she gets recruited into this group and she has to, one, deal with her past, but two, deal with what's being asked of her. So I enjoyed it. Again, Jennifer Lynn Barnes made kind of a love triangle, which this time I wasn't as in support of. Like with Inheritance Games, I loved the story way more than I loved the romance, but I enjoyed the romance. That was fine. This, I was kind of like, it's okay. I could do without the angsty teen stuff. It was good. I feel like I gave it 3 stars. It was enjoyable to listen to. This is the one I listened entirely on audiobook. I never had a physical form, and so I enjoyed it. It was enjoyable, but it was okay. So then I read Finley Donovan. Okay, Finley Donovan, so much fun. I know everybody's been raving about it. What I liked about it, it's about this woman who is overheard at like a Panera explaining to her book agent about her newest book. So she's a crime author. And she's describing kind of like how she's going to set up the murder and all these things. And she has to do research on this. And she gets overheard by somebody. And then she finds like a slip of paper in her purse that asks if she will like kill her husband basically for X amount of money. And Finley is in dire straits money-wise. And so it just results in just kind of this cascade of events that again was quite laugh out loud funny. Like it's not meant to be a super serious, scary kind of crime thriller book. It is a light-hearted book. And I think if you go into it with that idea, it is more funny. And it's just entertaining. So I highly enjoyed that. And then the last genre I've been reading a little bit more of, I've been trying to, because it's been part of my reading challenge, is to read more nonfiction books. And so the first one I read was this one, Raising Critical Thinkers, A Parent's Guide to Growing Wise Kids in the Digital Age by Julie Bogart, who is the author of a homeschool curriculum. So I love her stuff. I didn't love this book. I think for me, which I've learned in reading a number of her books, is her writing style is just not for me. It's a lot more tongue-in-cheek kind of, I don't even know how to explain it. There is definitely some nuggets and some good things to think about how to raise kids in this current age, but I just didn't jive with most of it. So it was a 3-star for me. And then the other one I read was Adorning the Dark by Andrew Peterson. And I enjoyed this book. I just feel like I wasn't totally the target audience. If I was more of a creative, which I am in some sense, like this is a creative outlet for me, YouTube. But I feel like this book was geared to even more creative people, like authors and songwriters and all these things. And I'm just not that. And so I feel like he had some great things. I didn't relate to it as much as I could have. There was a lot of things in there about really being able to follow God's calling and to use beautiful things to do that. And I just loved that, but it just didn't totally land. I think again, I gave it 3 stars, maybe 4 stars, because his story was really interesting. So those were the nonfiction books I read. And those are all the books I read in the past 3 months. And I know I haven't been as present on this channel just due to health stuff, but I've been reading and I really just wanted to come on here with a wrap up where I could be excited about all the books I've been reading and know that you guys would understand. I know you guys understand. So let me know down below if you have read any of these books, what you thought of them. And again, you're always welcome to join the reading challenge and the Discord down below. It's just fun. It's a fun little community we are building on there. And otherwise, guys, that's what I have. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you want to. All right, guys, I'll talk to you later.